Welcome to this webinar by REACHLaw on Turkey KKDIK latest developments and preparation for the actual registration deadline. And today we have two presenters, so Fredrik Johansson, myself, and Sibel Kilic going through the presentation and the different topics thereunder. So Sibel, if you please introduce yourself first.
Hello everyone, thank you Freddy. My name is Sibel Kilic. I am working as a director at REACHLaw Turkey and I am living in Istanbul. I am responsible for the team in Turkey. I am chemist as a background and I hold PhD in organic chemistry. Shortly in my career, I have been working on REACH since 2013 and I'm working on KKDIK since 2017 when the KKDIK regulation implemented in Turkey. This is from my side.
Thank you, Sibel. So Fredrik Johansson is the name, partner head of sales at REACHLaw, chemical background and a long background also in chemical regulatory compliance consulting, EHS related consulting and so forth. Been at REACHLaw since 2010, but worked on chemical regulatory topics even before the EU REACH came into force. So really a long background already. So happy to be here and guide you through the hoops and the latest developments and the registration process and so forth. So as customary with REACHLaw webinars, so you will be able to send in questions using the chat function. We will be looking at those questions and answering those as best we can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And the questions that you've been sending in ahead of the webinar we will also tackle first in the Q&A session. So we have a lot of questions, so we'll see how many new questions we will be able to handle during this webinar. Anyway, if there are questions that we are not answering during the webinar, so part of the bulk of the presentation or during the Q&A, we will then come back to you by email. And if we, for whatever reason, forget to do that, please do come back to us and remind us. There will be a recording available on this webinar on our YouTube channel called REACHLaw Talks at some point. Before that, there will also be a recording available on the platform we're showing this, so it should be available within just a few days. And as with all our webinars and our events, please do send feedback. We appreciate that very much. Helps us to make things better and develop, of course. So the agenda for today will be fairly busy. So we'll start with a mandatory, if you will, REACHLaw in brief, so you know who is talking here and who is REACHLaw if you don't know already. Then we'll look at the a bit of the background on the registration process in Turkey under KKDIK, also a bit of the dire basics of the KKDIK regulation. So if you all know the ins and outs of the KKDIK regulation, you can take a coffee during this time. Then we'll look at the latest developments, provide some insights into what's happening and some statistics. And then we'll look at how you should be preparing for the registration deadline, which is end of this year. Look at some challenges and way forward before then going to the conclusions and the Q&A session at the end. Duration of the webinar is plus 60 minutes. I will not even try to say that we will do it in 60 minutes, but just be aware. So if you have to run off at 60 minutes, then please do, and you can always revisit the recording later on. Okay, starting with REACHLaw. So who are we? So REACHLaw provides support for REACH and REACH-like chemical regulations globally. So what this means is, of course, nowadays it's Turkey KKDIK to a high degree, but also UK REACH, which is in a fairly active phase, not as active as Turkey, but still in an active phase and is in force. And then, of course, the EU REACH regulation, the mother of all chemical regulation, is still strong and kicking and ever evolving, and something that keeps us also very busy. Later on, at some point, there will be an India REACH regulation where we will also provide support as well as the K-REACH regulation in South Korea, which is already in force. So we have offices in several countries. We have the head office here in Finland, in Espoo. Then we have an office in Istanbul, Turkey, where Sibel is joining, and for the purpose of providing only representative services, and of course, Turkey KKDIK and related services. Then we have an office in Manchester in the UK to provide the same set of services essentially for UK REACH purposes, as well as OR services. Small office in Belgium, in New Delhi, and that's about it. So for Turkey REACH, so Turkey KKDIK, sometimes people call it Turkey REACH, sometimes they call it Turkey KKDIK. I just call it, or we at REACHLaw typically call it KKDIK, being the acronyms of the regulation in Turkish language. So as for the services, we provide a full set of Turkey KKDIK related services, as well as the SEA regulation, which is the CLP regulation, as well as the GBF regulation, which currently is governing the safety data sheets, albeit later on the KKDIK regulation will take over. We do pre-registrations, registrations, and most importantly, at this time, lead registrations. So this is a very busy time for us when it comes to lead registrations, and we expect that only to become more busy as the in the next few months. We also provide consortia services and management, joint submission management related services, and all other related and associated services, such as, for example, certifying safety data sheets and whatnot. So, as mentioned in the beginning, we also have a YouTube channel called REACHLaw Talks. We are trying to upload our webinar material there. I think we're lagging a few webinars behind, but they will be there soon, as well as this webinar. So if you haven't signed up and subscribed, please head over to YouTube and follow us there. There's a lot of content there already, and more will come soon. So if we look at just customary global regulatory updates, excluding Turkey KKDIK, because Turkey KKDIK is of course the topic of today's webinar, so that will be tackled separately. For UK REACH, it's still possible to submit late doing notifications. As of end of last year, the UK government said that they will be postponing these registration deadlines with 3 years. So now the first registration deadline is in 2026. Then the next is 28, and the final is in 2030 for the lesser tonnage band substances. At the moment, some companies and REACHLaw to some degree also working on lead registration dossiers, doing some registrations and so forth. But at the moment, most companies are waiting for this new registration model to be announced later. More information probably this year, but then announced and coming into force next year. Then we have EU REACH. We've had several webinars on this, and I invite you to have a look, for example, at our last webinar from beginning of February, State of Play webinar, where we're going to the REACH revision and what's happening on the EU front related to chemical regulations. Also EU REACH, but also other chemical regulations and what's brewing. So I will not go into the details here, except to say that there's a lot going on. India REACH is, of course, something that we're still waiting for to come into force. It looks as it will be postponed for a while. We'll follow the developments and keep you up to date. For K-REACH, that's going forward as the regulation stipulates, and the deadline for registration of 100 to 1,000 ton substances will be the next deadline, and that is in end of 2024. Then, just as out of curiosity, there's something brewing in the Ukraine, we call it Ukraine REACH, whereby there will be an effort to build an inventory before the actual regulation is then comes into force. But we'll keep you appraised on those developments also as we learn more. Just wanted to highlight that here in this webinar, unless you in case you didn't know. So as with all our webinars, just a disclaimer, copyright. So any actions you may take based on this presentation is of course your responsibility and your risk. So no representations or warranties are made with regards to the completeness or accuracy of the contents of this presentation, and no liability is accepted by REACHLaw. So that's now our lawyers are happy that I said that. And just to conserve a bit of bandwidth, I would just terminate my camera feed as we are having people joining all over the world with sometimes a bit slow internet connections. So we'll focus on the most important bits. Okay, so now I will hand over to Sibel to discuss and brief you on Turkey KKDIK registration process in brief and a bit more. So Sibel, please go ahead and just let me know when to change slides.
Yeah, thank you, Ophelia, and hello again. Let's start with the Turkey KKDIK registration process in brief. Next slide. And KKDIK regulation is actually been in force since 2017 already. So there are certain transitional provisions that apply, such as the pre-registration phase and then the registration phase. More info will be in the next slide. So the KKDIK acronym comes from translated into English as a regulation on chemicals registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction. So very similar to the REACH acronym. Obviously, it's Turkish. That's where the KKDIK comes from. And here, the counterpart of the authority side is the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization, and Climate Change. And next slide. So the basic requirements are as with EU REACH, the requirement to pre-register and register substances manufactured in or imported into Turkey at 1 ton or more per year, unless exempted from the KKDIK registration requirements. So there is a same requirement saying that no data, no market, which essentially means that if you don't provide the information about your substances, in other words, pre-register, and then register your substances with the information required, you will not have a market in Turkey. Okay, and next slide. I will not go in details here, but looking at the scope, we can say that the 99% of the substances are within the scope of the KKDIK regulation, meaning that all of these substances in one way or another have to comply with the KKDIK regulation and requirements. So essentially, we can almost say that all substances, unless specifically exempted, are within the scope of the KKDIK regulation. And next slide. Here we can go shortly to introduce the KKS IT. The translation means Chemical Registration System, and as short, it is the KKS. It is an online hybrid system combining the REACH IT, a Euclid, and CSR tool, and everything is online, so you cannot use it offline or download any dossier, or cannot use as an application as it is used in Europe. So everything is online and everything is of course in Turkish language. And you have to have Turkish citizenship enabled to create an access for this account. For those who are in Turkey and not create an account yet, should know that it may take up to 2-3 weeks to activate an account. So you can access the KKS system by using this link, but below, but you should create a company account on ECBS and then access to the KKS system. And next slide. Here, the registration window for all substances that are manufactured in Turkey or imported into Turkey at 1 ton per year or more, and it's not specifically exempted, need to be registered at the end of December 2023. So the registration window is the same for all substances regardless of the tonnage band. However, the tonnage bands are the same as for EU REACH, so they are 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, and over 1,000 tons, where By each tonnage band, the information requirements are increasing as well as obviously the cost. As for the registration types, we have the full substance, which I would say is a default, and on-site isolated intermediates, then also transported isolated intermediates. We will not go into details for the definitions here, but would say that all definitions on the registration types are the same as in the EU REACH regulation. Submission, of course, are made in Turkish language as mentioned in previous part. Okay, and the next slide. So the threshold for the substances requiring a KKDIK pre-registration and then registration when manufactured in or imported into Turkey is 1 ton or more per year. And just to indicate again, and next slide. This slide highlights the registration window for all the tonnage bands. They are all have started from beginning of the year 2021 and will continue until the end of December. So December 31st, 2023. This is a bit different than we have for EU REACH purposes. So these are all ending at the same time and have the same registration deadline. Next, then. Here I will say that again, then if you have not KKDIK pre-registered already, please do as soon as possible your pre-registration. Next slide, please. Then here let's look at the joint submission. The idea is that each pre-registrant of the same substance will have to take a part of in a joint registration effort of jointly submitting the registration, meaning submitting co-registration data on behalf of the substance. It essentially means all the analytical, toxicity scan data to the ministry in Turkey in a similar way as in EU REACH, where we have one company becoming a lead registrant for a joint submission and all other registrants for the same substance becoming a co-registrant. So individual submission is not possible unless you have some sort of special permission from the ministry, because the same offer principle, the one substance, one registration principle applies also in Turkey. But in this PRECIEP that we talked about, in this cooperation of companies, you will then eventually enter into become a CIEP, and you will share the data, you will share the cost in a fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory way, and then eventually go ahead and submit the joint registration where you will become registrant under the KKDIK in Turkey. And next, here we can define the KKDIK registration process in 3 steps and 1 pre-registration. Here the deadline is 31st December 2023. Registration is a part of the same joint submission. Here, select the lead registrant. Everyone else is a co-registrant. And again, registration deadline is 31st of December 2023. Step 3, manufacture import at the pre-registered tonnage band allowed before the registration deadline of 31st December 2023 and after the deadline in the registered tonnage band. Next slide. So here also we will just look to the owner representation. We would like to highlight that it is good for you to understand as a non-Turkish manufacturer or as a non-Turkish formulator, you can assign an owner representative in Turkey to take care on KKDIK importer obligation. So this is pre-registration and registration. So this is again the same setup as it was in EU REACH purposes. When you select an owner representative, they must be a Turkish company and also have a sufficient background in the practical handling of substance and information related to the substances. And let's see also the next slide. Here at the table, you can see the differences between the regulation in a summary. Here, I would like to indicate that as mentioned, all tonnage bands are at the same, and the exceptions are the same. The volume related part are the same, but here I would like to indicate that we have chemical assessment expert for Turkey, which is obliged to review the dossier and prepare the safety data sheet after the registration deadline. Okay, and next slide. If you look here, the KKDIK timeline ahead. So from 1st of the January 2024, if we are starting to place a new substance on the Turkish market or any substances that you have not registered, you will first have to go through the inquiry procedure. And once the inquiry has been accepted, you can go ahead and submit your registration. But only once the registration has been submitted and you have been issued a registration number, only then you can start placing your substances on Turkish market at 1 ton or more annually. Other than this, the authority will be initiating the dossier and substance evaluation, which will be continuous process for the registered substances. Here, we are also expecting the authority to publish the authorization list, which will be relevant for the companies which have substances under this list and authorization process. And next slide. Here, Ferry, thank you. Then I will give floor to you.
Thank you, Sibel. Okay, so look now, starting to look at the latest developments related to KKDIK regulation and more specifically related to the registration effort that is ongoing at the moment, with the aim to register by the deadline, of course, end of this year. So I think some of you who are following our newsletter, you have received this information already, and if you're not following, please, you can always subscribe to our newsletter on our website. Easy to find, just Google it and you will find it. So earlier this month, the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change came with an announcement, actually a few announcements to make life, I would say, a bit easier for once for only representatives, and secondly for companies who need to register by, of course, the deadline. So we'll look at these two in a bit more detail. So one of the big, well, let's say practical, how should I say, practical issues we had last, I think it was in last fall at some point, when it became apparent that suppliers would have to be included in the only representative dossiers, meaning that you would need to list the companies you are covering as an OR, meaning the importers in Turkey. So you would have to indicate these in section 1.7 in the dossier. And this means that if there are any changes, you would need to just update the dossier constantly. Of course, in many cases, there are not that many changes, but if there are, then that would mean there would be a lot of back and forth updating of for example, the registration dossier, in this case by the only representative. However, in February earlier this year, this month, the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change actually came out and say that, okay, it's no longer mandatory to include this supply information, so the importers information under this section 1.7 in the dossier, but it remains optional. Albeit the ministry also said that they still, however, recommend to include this information. But in practice, of course, we all know that if something is not mandatory, it's very unlikely that it will be included in the dossier. So if you look at the box on the right, you can see that these are the different sections in the dossier, and in this case, the section 1.7 will then it's no longer mandatory, but is optional. It is, however, good to understand that, of course, still the basic requirements for the only representative applies. So you have to keep, so the only representative itself has to, in its records, have information on the importers in Turkey. So meaning who they are, for what substances, and what are the annual tonnages of those importers. So how many tons they are importing annually to Turkey per importer. So this is called volume tracking. So the removal of the suppliers requirement in the dossier does not by any means mean that any only representative requirements are lessened. It is just a technical tasks that become a bit easier for the only representative. And we, of course, welcome this change. Then there was another announcement pertaining to chemical safety reports. And this actually goes into alleviating, I think, some of the pains the industry is feeling when they are lead registering substances under KKDIK, meaning that before this announcement, which I will go through in just a second, you would have to, of course, for substances above that you're registering above 10 tons annually, you would have to provide a chemical safety report, and if it's classified, then also the related exposure assessments and so forth. So meaning that the chemical safety report typically was already available from the EU REACH regulation, and as part of the lead registration work in Turkey, it was essentially a translation task of translating the existing chemical safety report from English to Turkish language. And this, of course, takes a bit of time, and depending very much on the length, of course, of the chemical safety report and data included and so forth, number of exposure scenarios, etc., it can be quite a lot of translation work included. So what I think this is what the ministry recognized, that this is a bit of a bottleneck at the moment. So what they said, again, in the beginning of February, is that you can actually now just go ahead and submit, for now, the chemical safety report in English language. So you can register with an English language CSR for the deadline end of this year. However, if you're going to do this, then you will need to submit an updated dossier, including the full Turkish CSR by end of next year, so by end of 2024. So for those companies who are already working and translating, or have almost translated already the CSRs, then recommendation is just, and if you have the capacity, is just to go ahead and do the translation and the Turkish version of CSR anyway, because you will anyway have to do it latest by end of next year. So this new approach really helps with a capacity problem, meaning that you do not have to translate sometimes these sometimes very long documents into Turkish. So a bit of easement there from the authorities into the lead registration process. And albeit this is not entirely related, just wanted to also highlight that still, and this is not related to CSRs, the robust study summaries and study summaries that are also then to be submitted as part of the lead dossier still need to be translated into Turkish language. It's not related to chemical safety report per se, but still wanted to say that there is no change to that requirement. So this is also, I would say, good news that we welcome, especially will help as we go closer to the registration deadline. Then another not so maybe pleasant update came in January with the fee updates. So the Ministry of Environmental Urbanization is annually checking the registration fees for KKDIK, and what happened is that these fees were doubled and then some. Albeit the fees are still, of course, cheap compared to EU REACH registration fees or UK REACH fees, which are essentially the same. But still, a doubling meant that we went from around 60 euros to around 110 euros for the smaller tonnage band, and then of course incrementally higher, whereas the highest tonnage band over 1,000 tons today costs around 1,650 euros, or if you're across the pond in the US, then it's around 1,770 US dollars. Exchange rates from end of last week, so small deviations there, of course. But these are the fees that will now apply to the registrations going forward for the for this registration deadline, end of this year. Discounts will apply to small and medium-sized enterprises as they do for EU REACH, for example. So the fees you see here are for large company sizes. Some statistics. People are always interested in statistics, and of course it is interesting because that shows you the level of activity when it goes to what's happening for KKDIK registrations and lead registrations and so forth. So albeit the latest pre-registration information is not very readily available, we know that there have been more than 250,000 pre-registrations already submitted, and this still keeps on growing. This doesn't mean that 250,000 substances or registrations will be submitted, obviously, but still quite a significant number. For 2,771 different substances, a lead registrant has already been nominated, and of these, some 650 lead registration dossiers have already been submitted to the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization and Climate Change in Turkey. So we can already see a bit of a progress here. And the ministry is expecting that approximately 6,000 to 7,000, I'm just using 7,000 as the higher number, different substances would be KKDIK registered. So this means that we are not quite halfway yet when it comes to nominations of lead registrations, and less than 10% of substances that have been a lead dossier have been submitted for. So quite the distance to go still, and time is ticking, as we all know. And still, this hasn't changed. So at this time, and I don't expect this to change much, most of the lead registrants are only representatives for non-Turkish companies, in many cases companies who have also EU REACH lead registered, so have been the lead registrants for EU REACH purposes. So what's happening now with the KKDIK registrations? As Sibel mentioned, late pre-registrations are still possible, and you can essentially do that up until the end of this year, so to the end of, up until the actual registration deadline. If you don't have this valid pre-registration in place, essentially you should not be able to manufacture or import those substances above 1 ton to Turkey. So if you have not pre-registered your substances, just get them done pre-registered as soon as possible. On the lead registration front, we can see from the statistics that there has been progress. Nominations have been in an active phase and are still continuing to be in an active phase, but more is needed because there's still a huge gap and time is running out, as you all know, I think, by now. Also, the dossier preparations and submissions are picking up, and this herein comes the benefit of not having to submit the CSR in Turkish language, because then you do not have to essentially do much for the CSR, save maybe remove some exposure scenarios for users which are not relevant in Turkey, and be done with it, more or less. So the exercise of including a CSR in a lead dossier, for example, in Turkey for KKDIK purposes, can be a fairly small task, I would say. Letter of accesses are very scarce at the moment, but as we saw from this previous statistics that some 650 substances have already had their lead dossiers submitted to the ministry in Turkey. this would essentially mean that if these letter of accesses are not yet available for these 650 substances, they will be available very shortly. So we are seeing a clear pickup in the availability of letter of accesses. Of course, the change is huge because we went from 0 to few, so it's still a big change, but there's a lot more still to go. So for co-registrants and companies registering co-registering substances, so joining the joint submissions of the lead dossier, then there essentially it is still a bit of a waiting game, because we're waiting for letter of access to become available, meaning that when they become available, we will check the applicability and check the costs, and then if everything is okay, then of course purchase the letter of access and then start joining the joint submission and of course registering the substance. You can start with the co-registration work already before that in the form of collecting analytical information and whatnot. And this is what we are, for example, already doing with our customers. But the biggest issue is still, of course, that letter of accesses are slowly becoming available. They should become more quickly available. So if there are any lead registrants on the line today joining this webinar, please do make sure that you can issue those letter of accesses as soon as possible. We would not want to be in a situation where everyone needs to co-register in December. That'll be quite the panic, I would say. And for the registration deadline, it is end of this year, and you should act accordingly. We know that there has been a lot of rumors out there that have been shut down, and all I can say is that, of course, anything is possible on this earth, more or less. But I'm pretty sure if there will be any postponement of the registration deadline, I'm pretty sure they would say it at the last possible minute. So what this means in practice is that you cannot count on any deadlines being postponed. Therefore, just go with what we know at the moment, and that is that the deadline is end of this year. And have your dossiers submitted by this deadline, according to the tricks of the trade, so to speak. So now let's look at how you can prepare for this registration deadline. I've included some workflows, flowcharts. So if we look at the overview of how to prepare, start preparing, identifying your own role, so to speak, what you need to do. So first of all, you should start the following process already now if you haven't done it already. So the question you should ask yourself, do you want to place your substance or substances on the Turkish market at 1 ton or more from 1st of January next year? If you don't, then, well, this webinar is not for you. And you can, I think, there will be a sigh of relief, I think. However, I think most of you are in a situation where you want to have your substances on the Turkish market at 1 ton or more, as you may have had them already on the market, likely. So assuming you have pre-registered, if not, then do it as soon as possible, as discussed. You should first check, does the substance have a lead registrant? So meaning, has someone nominated themselves as a lead? If yes, good for you. You are considered a co-registrant, and you can go with the co-registration workflow that we will look at next. However, if there is no lead registrant identified, then you should follow the lead registration workflow, which is also available a few slides down the road, so to speak. So we start with the co-registration workflow. So you can check the KKS system for the lead registrant contact details, or sometimes they have may have or should have emailed you notifying that they are nominating or being interested in becoming a lead registrant and going through the hoops and then eventually being nominated as a lead registrant. So you should have this information in your email and in the email that is indicated in the KKS system. So if you have an only representative, then the only representative should have received this email. And we have, for example, REACHLaw as an OR in Turkey for KKDIK purposes. We receive this almost on a daily basis, I would say, maybe, and it's picking up, as said. Then you should contact the lead registrant and ask the following information. Is the letter of access available and related agreements? So is the CF agreement or joint or a registration cooperation agreement or whatever it is called. Sometimes, mostly it's called a CF agreement, but it has many names. But essentially, is there a letter of access available and what agreements do we need to sign and agree upon? So if there is, if there's no such agreements yet available, then you should check with the lead registrant and ask when will those be available and come back when a bit of time has passed, but don't wait too long. We can't just wait forever as the deadline is approaching. However, if there is a letter of access available, which we assume there will be, hopefully in good time before the registration deadline, meaning like 3 months at the latest before the deadline, like at the utmost latest 3 months before the deadline, preferably much earlier. Then you should check the basics of the documentation, the letter of access, and check what is the scope, what is the SIP, meaning the substance identity profile, does it match with my substance, what users are covered, will the CSR be submitted by the lead, or the guidance of safe use be submitted by the lead, or is it something that you should submit either based on a template provided by the lead registrant or part of the CSR provided by the lead registrant, you submit a part, your own part of the CSR, or what? Have clarity on what is the scope of this, the letter of access. So the question is then, is everything okay and clear? I will actually have a separate slide on this. If not, then you should just circle back to the lead and get clarity and negotiate with the lead registrant. However, in some cases, if it's not still clear, there are maybe many reasons, several reasons why this is the case. Maybe you don't have the same substance. Maybe your users are excluded, or both, and so forth. You can, in some cases, do an opt-out. You can submit your own CSR, but if it's the wrong substance ID, obviously, then you're in the wrong CF. So you should check your substance ID. And if still there is some issues with the lead registrant, then for whatever reason not providing you the letter of access, but providing it to others and stuff like that, then of course you can contact the ministry and ask for help. Or your only representative can do that also. However, if we assume that everything is okay and we can go full steam ahead, then you should go ahead and purchase the letter of access and do it as soon as possible. There's no time to waste. We can think about that, like, okay, we have 10 months to do this. Why not wait a bit and then do it? We do not know how big of a hurry lead registrants will be closer to the deadline, so I just recommend get it over with. You have to do it anyway. Do it while the weather is good. I think that's a Finnish proverb that quite doesn't translate to English. Then join the joint submission in KKS. Prepare and submit the co-registration dossier. You can of course do this also in parallel, have everything ready already in advance, but in this workflow, it's like this. Pay the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization, Climate Change fee that we looked at earlier, and then you are done. You will get a registration number after 21 days at the latest when the ministry does a completeness check, and then you're done with the registration. You need to still, of course, keep it up to date. As mentioned, just wanted to quickly look at the being mindful of the time. Again, looking at what the letter of access related information is sent and received by the lead registrant. So typically, the lead registrant provides a package to the co-registrants, including a letter of access, price, so what this does it cost, and the details, of course, included. Then there will be an agreement, a CIF agreement, for example, in this case, including cost-sharing principles, and there typically is an acceptance letter to the CIF agreement. So meaning that they don't have to circulate the same agreement with all companies signing a CIF agreement. So you sign a separate signature page and just send that to the lead registrant, meaning you have accepted the CIF agreement, which is called a CIF agreement in this case. Can be called something else, as mentioned. Once it's accepted, you have signed, the lead registrant will then send an invoice to the co-registrant, and once the invoice has been paid, the lead registrant will then provide access to the joint submission in the KKS system. And of course, optionally then share, maybe if there's a CSR template to provide or part CSR to be submitted by the co-registrants individually. The same goes for the guidance of safe use. In some cases, they may provide some sort of information, a bit like a template that you can use when populating the dossier in KKS. So there's nothing to upload, but they can provide it as an information, as a document. For example, like supported uses, use descriptors, etc. And like a compositional information and so forth. And also, I just wanted to highlight, I think most of you already know the basic case of buying a letter of access, meaning you buy one letter of access and you are done with that. However, in some cases, and we're seeing this specifically for Turkey, is that you have, for example, an only representative in this case who wants to register a substance, or is going to be the lead registrant for the substance, and you have data owners who are providing information to be used in the lead dossier. Then you have a number of co-registrants who are going to want to register the same substance, but in this case, the data owner does not provide so-called sub-licensing rights to the co-registrant. What this means is that these will have to buy a letter of access, a project letter of access from the lead registrant here, but they will then also additionally have to buy a letter of access for the data. And this letter of access is also something typically that the lead registrant needs to buy. In some cases, it may not be the case, but in most cases, just for simplicity, I will just include it here. So don't be afraid or confused if in some cases you actually need to purchase two letter of accesses. The lead registrant can only manage this part, then the data owners typically outside of Turkey, are managing this part themselves separately. And only once you have both can you register. And the lead registrant will check that you actually have legitimate access to the data law. And of course, they will see whether you purchased the project law before they grant you access to the joint submission in KKS. So just wanted to highlight that, because this is something quite specific we're seeing for Turkey. Then we go to the lead registration workflow. So this was the second workflow, if you remember from the overview slide. So optionally, if you are now in a situation where you don't have a lead registrant available for this for the substance. You can of course send an email optionally to all the pre-CIF members in this in the pre-CIF and just ask, come on guys, take one of you take the lead and be done with it. However, I think most companies want to do this, but there's someone always has to become the lead. So we assume that no one else wants to become a lead, and I would say this is a fairly fair assumption. Then you should nominate yourself as a lead registrant, and of course, meaning that you first say that I want to become a lead registrant and ask if it's okay, are there any objections, and provide, for example, 2 weeks time for the pre-CIF members to, or CIF members in some cases, to come back and accept you as a lead registrant. And please, of course, document everything. And why should you become a lead registrant? So you are, for example, the lead registrant for EU REACH purposes, then I think you should be in a strong position to also become a lead registrant for the Turkish market for KKDIK purposes, either yourself if you have a subsidiary there, or through an early representative that you have appointed. In some cases, if you are not the lead, you may be a EU REACH registrant of the same substance, and you may be part of a consortium, EU REACH consortium for the substance, and have access to the data. In those cases, you also are in a very strong position to become a lead registrant because you have access to the data. You already know the data. You know who is managing the data from the EU side. You are, of course, a Turkish or non-Turkish manufacturer, formulator, or importer in Turkey of strategically important substances, and this means important for you. So if there's a good business case for your substance, you have a strong business, then why not take the leap and become the lead registrant also, because this apparently is important substance for you, for the Turkish market. You want to obtain a potentially more significant market share in Turkey for the substance. I think being in a lead registrant position, you are naturally in a position of authority, and then of course, if you take the lead and no one else has wanted to take the lead, it may also indicate that there are no other registrants, or there are very few registrants, which means that you would have a bigger market share. You want to control the joint registration effort on your terms as much as possible. That is a strong argument also. Better to be in control. So better to rule in hell than serve in heaven, I think, may apply in this case. So if you want to control the joint registration effort, then become the lead. And very important to understand, you do not have to work alone on the lead dossier. There are experts still available to support you, and one of those is, of course, yours truly, REACHLaw. Now, for example, with the CSR being able to be submitted in English language, it lessens the translation work quite significantly. So to be honest, the lead registration work is not that big of a deal. The biggest deal, if you will, is getting access to the data, and preferably sub-licensing rights. Once that is done, it is, I would say, fairly smooth sailing in preparing the lead dossier. It's nothing compared to preparing the lead dossier for EU REACH purposes, because there we didn't have any data. We had to do everything from scratch, more or less. We had to learn the process. Now we've been doing that for well, how many years is it? 14, 15 years already. So doing this for Turkey is not that big of a deal. Don't be afraid to take a leap of faith and become the lead registrant, using that analogy. So if you are then the lead, then of course you should prepare the lead dossier and take care of related activities. So collect the information, share data, share costs, and so forth. Communicate within the CIF, and do the necessary translations and KDU certifications of the dossier and parts thereof, etc. There we have a separate webinar series, 3-part series on that, so I invite you to have a look at that. It's available on YouTube. We'll not go into details here. So once that is done, submit the lead registrant early enough to allow co-registrants to join the joint submission, so that they have enough time for going through the hoops of buying a letter of access, joining joint submission, submitting the dossier, etc., paying the Ministry Environment fee before the deadline. So you should do that at, like, our recommendation is to do it, of course, as soon as possible, but at least give 3 months. That's like the bare minimum for co-registrants to be able to do this with not too much pain. And then, of course, the lead registrant also has to pay the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization and Climate Change registration fee, and then sell letter of accesses to members of the joint submission and so forth. And when that everything is done, then you can again sigh a relief for having, and tap yourself on the back. Good job done, registered by the deadline, you and your co-registrants. So joint members of the joint submission. So there's really no time to waste. You should become the lead registrant if you want to continue placing substances on the Turkish market starting next year at 1 ton or more. So I think the message here is just to step up, become the lead, and for example, REACHLaw is happy to help you. It's not that big of a deal, to be honest. Okay, I've been ranting on for a while here, so I will let Sibel take over just to summarize some of the challenges and way forward before then going to conclusions and the Q&A. And I said earlier, I suspected we would go over the 60 minutes, and we will. So sorry for that. Thank you for sticking with us. And Sibel, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, thank you, Heidi. And then continue with the next slide, challenges and way forward. Here are some challenges. They are like everything is in Turkish language, a KKS IT system, guidance, legal text, communication with the authority, and very low level of registrants. This means a low level of available letter of access, sorry, as is mentioned in previous slides. For purchase, law are needed to purchase access to the joint submission to submit the co-registrations. And no letter of access means companies are not able to budget. Turkey KKDIK compliance costs are unknown, difficult for companies to commit sale of chemicals to the Turkish market, leads to disruptions and uncertainty in the supply chain. Here also multiple data sources. In some cases, registrants will need to purchase access to the directly from the data owners, as also we mentioned within the presentation. Multiple letter of access may be needed, more complex to manage. And next slide. So we here to indicate that we have almost 10 months to go to the registration deadline, which is 31st of December 2023, to get everything done. The authority has repeatedly said that they are not going to extend the registration deadline. And next slide. And then challenges and way forward. Here, a joint submission must have a lead registrant, and co-registrant must become a part of the joint submission. Then please choose a reliable lead registrant that will do a good job. If there is no lead registrant yet, you need to take extraordinary steps to find one or become the lead registrant yourself, and sometimes through your own representative. Have clarity on the lead registration status latest by end of March 2023, preferably sooner. And take the lead registrant role yourself. Someone must always become the lead registrant. then don't be afraid of becoming the KKDIK lead registrant. You do not have to be owner of the data. Data is available from EU REACH and up for negotiation. Preparing the KKDIK lead registration dossier and managing the joint registration effort is not a big deal. Good owner representatives are also great lead registrant candidates. And don't wait, please act now. And this is from my side.
Thank you, Sibel. Okay, so now just quick conclusions before going to the Q&A. So we know that the registration deadline is end of this year, so we need to act accordingly. There have been changes by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change on some of the data requirements. So CSR is allowed in English language. That's good. We applaud that change. Start your registration work now if you haven't done so already. This can mean that you start collecting data, start collecting analytical information you need eventually for the registration work. Whether you're the co-registrant or lead registrant, then start now. And then if you are not, there is no lead registrant, then I just suggest you become the lead registrant. There's no time to waste. You can do it yourself if you have a subsidiary in Turkey, or then of course you can have, or if you're a Turkish company, obviously, or then if you have an OR appointed in Turkey, then you can also, of course, do it through OR. And as I think already repeated to nausea almost, it's not that big of a deal to become a lead registrant. So I just recommend and highly emphasize that the time is running out. Please just get it done, and there are experts available to assist you in the process, at least for the moment. Who knows in the coming months, but for the moment this looks okay. So if there's no lead registrant, there's of course no joint submission. If there's no joint submission, there's no registration. If there's no registration, there is no market for substances on Turkey from 1st of January 2024 at 1 ton or more. So no data, no market, as Sibel mentioned in her opening slides, more or less. So don't postpone with the nomination and the dossier preparation work. And I think mentioned a few times already, but REACHLaw is of course happy to help you with these, and all of these compliance works, being an only representative, taking care of lead registration work. That is the most urgent part. So if you are thinking and want to have your substance lead registered by, for example, an only representative, then REACHLaw absolutely can do that, and we have the capacity to do that. So please don't be afraid of asking for example, for quotation. We're happy to provide it. So please do, for example, sales@reachlaw.fi or contact Sibel or myself directly, and we'll be happy to provide such information to you. All right, that was the shilling part. Now we go to the Q&A. So I see that we have quite some questions already in the chat box, but as alluded to earlier, we already had quite a lot of questions submitted ahead of the webinar. So we will first go through those, and I suspect, as we are already 5 minutes past the hour, let's see how many we can actually take from the chat. So Q&A, and I've put these questions. We have 21 questions here. We got a lot more, but I've tried to consolidate these into similar type of questions to some degree. So if you see familiar text here, it is because it's been more or less copy pasted from the registration form. So we got a lot of question on the deadline extension, and I think I already covered this in my part, but let me just reiterate. So at the moment, there is no reason to believe that the registration deadlines would be extended. So you need to act accordingly, as if the registration deadline is end of this year, because that is the only information we have going for us at the moment. And as said earlier, if for whatever reason there will be some extensions due to whatever reason, likely the reason, of course, that the industry is not acting fast enough, not having lead registrants available for all substances, then of course if they postpone, I'm pretty sure they would say it at the last possible minute. And it may be some sort of a alleviation on maybe data requirement submissions, or maybe for something for like lesser tonnage banned substances, maybe something, who knows. But I would highly recommend just go with the registration deadline that is in the law at the moment, and which is end of this year. Just have that mindset that you need to have everything done by end of the year, and you will do fine. Then we had the question also, a few questions on the no lead questions. So meaning that, for example, that now half of substances for which we need to submit the KKDIK dossier are orphan of lead registrants. So is there anything you can do? So absolutely there is. You can become the lead registrant. If you cannot, if you are, for example, in Turkey as an importer or manufacturer, then yes, just become the lead registrant, as mentioned many times over. Have, for example, contact REACHLaw. I will help you with the dossier preparation and have everything done by end of this year. Just that is the easiest. Don't be afraid of becoming the lead. If you are outside of Turkey, then and have appointed an only representative, then of course the only representative can also take the lead role. If you are outside of Turkey, but you are in a role that you cannot appoint an only representative, then you should contact your suppliers and check if they can appoint the only representative to take care of the lead registration work. So even though you haven't done anything for example, for EU REACH, don't own any data, and there still is a situation where you do not, for your substance, you do not have a lead registrant, then just step up and take the lead, and let's see what happens, and rest assured, if, for example, REACHLaw would support you, then absolutely we will get the work done. And have negotiate access to the data and so forth. And if there are issues with getting access to the data, we can always pivot to the situation whereby the data owners provide the letter of access themselves directly. Then it becomes a bit more complicated, but then at least we bypass the situation where we are in difficult negotiation for data access with sub-licensing rights. So we bypass that issue completely. Not an ideal solution, but a solution nonetheless. Going forward, so I will, Sibel, take just a few questions, and then I'll just ask you to take a few. And please also feel, Sibel, free to complement my answers. So question number 3. There was some statistics. They were asking about statistics. I think this is something we covered in the presentation already. So I invite you to have a look at the presentation for recording, for example. So 2,771 lead registrants nominated, 650 lead dossiers submitted, and the authorities assume estimating some 7,000 different substances to be registered for Turkey. We'll see what the final number is, but that's what they're talking about, 6,000–7,000. Question number 4. We are still waiting for KKDIK compliance from our suppliers. There are still no clear answers. So this is maybe a comment, not so much of a question. And I can tell you that you are not alone. This is happening on many fronts. Typically in cases where you are a formulator of a like a mixture that you are placing on the Turkish market, and you are waiting for your suppliers, the manufacturers of the substances, for example, to appoint an only representative, or maybe they have appointed an only representative, but they are still not they haven't committed to actually registering the substance. So if you are a formulator in this case, you can appoint an only representative yourself, and this OR can take the lead role if needed. So again, take matters into your own hand. Don't wait for the suppliers endlessly. Just act, and act now. Question 5. Do you know if guidance will be published on joint submissions? So Sibel, will you take this one, please?
Yeah, here I would say that the guidance for the registrations is already available in the authority website, and they are updating the guidance. You can check it regularly, then you can find it under the authority website. And in Turkish language, of course, yeah.
In Turkish, of course. Question 6, what are the responsibilities of an OR in Turkey? So we'll not go into details. I think Sibel covered this already in the presentation, and we have a lot of presentations on this subject on the REACHLaw Talks YouTube channel, so have a look. But just in brief, the OR takes upon itself the responsibility of import in the context of the KKDIK regulation on behalf of the importers in Turkey. So what it means is that it can register a substance on behalf of the importers jointly, and this OR needs to be appointed by either a manufacturer or a formulator of a mixture. So manufacturer of a substance or a formulator of a mixture. And those substances in that mixture can, of course, then be covered by an OR as appointed by the manufacturer or formulator. And then the OR, of course, needs to know who the importers are to be able to cover them, and they need to track volumes and, of course, take care of pre-registration and registration and keep all the dossier information up to date. And they can also lead register. So that is the short answer. Number 7. What does the activity need to do for co-registrants now? This has been covered, I think, to a high degree in this presentation, so I will not reiterate it here. Question, comment, maybe number 8. Many EU consortia are not ready yet for passing on rights to use data, EU data for Turkey. Yes, we know, in those situations, you should ask the consortia that do they want a situation where we are using a separate data set for Turkey than in the EU? Do they want to have a data set that deviates and the results in the dossier are different? I'm pretty sure this will spawn a lot of questions from the chemical agency in the EU, ECHA, and also in Turkey. So it is in everyone's best interest to use the same data set across as many jurisdictions as possible and keep that data set, of course, up to date. So I would just have another go at those registrars or these EU data holders and say that, and then of course ask also that are they not interested in receiving additional revenue. I think no one would say no to additional revenue unless not functioning all faculties, so to speak. Okay, question number 9. How will they solve the issue of having short of lead registrants? How to deal with substances where nobody takes the lead? I think this has also been covered in this presentation to a high degree, so just get it done. The authorities will not solve this. It is up to the industry to self-organize for this purpose. So don't wait for the knight in shining armor to come and rescue you from these requirements. You have to self-organize. Just get it done. Just to paraphrase Nike, just do it. Question number 10. This goes to Sibel. So I would ask, the question is, I would like to know how substances may have been registered. Does the ministry have a plan to publish the regulation about the data sharing on the KKDIK as well as EU REACH, so the same as EU REACH, I guess. I would like to know why lead registrants for most substances do not contact the co-registrants yet. Do you want to take this, Sibel?
I will try to answer partially, but let me check. Yeah, okay. I can say that we for now cannot know the registered substances, only can see the lead companies for that substances from KKS. And then for the data sharing regulation, from the previous communication with the authority, they informed that they are planning to do so, but we do not have any new update on this. And I think I cover the part that I can inform you. Anything, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Sibel. So next question, number 11. What are the KKDIK requirements for articles? Sibel, if you want to take this quickly. They are the same as for EU REACH, but if you want to add some information.
Yeah, just to say that highlight with the article, it's the same as EU REACH. Just to say that, for example, Article 7, it REACH is same as Article 8 in the KKDIK, then it can be considered also.
Yes, thank you, Sibel. And then also a question on delays, but also a bit more elaboration on this. So the question goes, December 2023 deadline, is it going to be delayed? What to do if my substance does not have a lead registrant elected? How can I get the list of CEF members from Turkey REACH IT? I've heard that there will be a new platform where I can check, is it already available? So I think we've answered the December deadline, what if there is no lead, but if you can maybe elaborate, Sibel, on how to get the list of CEF members and if there's a new platform coming or whatnot.
Yeah, for this CEF member, the same platform as REACH IT is KKS, as we mentioned in the presentation. From this KKS, the companies can extract the CEF members. It's the only system that you can check for the CEF members, which is already available. Other than this, I can say that for the registered information, for the information regarding to registered substances, which will be publicly available, the authority is also planning this dissemination page, but after the registration deadline.
Thank you, Sibel. And then also the next question goes to you on data sharing. So I think, you already mentioned that there's some guidance on data sharing in Turkish, but will there be the data sharing regulation? Do you know when that is coming? I think this relates to that, I think.
Yeah, just to once more here highlight that yes, authorities said that yes, this data sharing regulation can be implemented, but they didn't provide any timeline for this. And data sharing related guidances are already available in the authority website in Turkish language.
Thank you, Sibel. And then question number 14, I can take this. So again, well, this does not directly have to do with the deadlines, but the question is, do you know when lead registrant must submit their lead registration dossier? So the authority released information stating that there would be new deadlines for lead registration based on their tonnage, but no actual deadlines. So this, I think this has been rebutted, so they have not communicated anything further on this. So the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change. So we are not expecting any additional information at this time, at least. So what this means is that, of course, as a lead registrant, you should submit in good time in order to be able, so that the co-registrants have ample time to buy a letter of access and then, of course, join the joint submission and prepare and submit their own co-registrants. So as mentioned earlier, I would like at the minimum leave 3 months for the co-registrants to get their act together, but preferably a lot more, so at least 6 months. So time is really running out, but there are no like set deadlines for the time being, at least by the authorities, and I'm not expecting any. They can recommend something, but I do not expect that they would include some hard deadlines. Or what do you think, Sibel?
Yes, I agree with your comments. Also, additionally, I can say that as we received latest updates from the authority, which these updates aiming to get in help with the lead registrations, then I think authorities expecting all the CFs to be organized themselves to select the leads. This is one part, and maybe we will not be receiving so many big updates within this. Then they are waiting the CFs, the industry, to be organized on that part.
Thank you, Sibel. This is the last slide with the pre-submitted questions, and as we know, time is running. So this was a very good question. So number 15, if ORs are not required to include the dossier in the dossier information of the importers in Turkey, so this section 1.7, it could be a potential issue related to the international sanctions against Russian and Belarusian companies. Could you please comment on it? So as said, the only representatives already need to know who the customers are in Turkey to be able to cover them. So this section 1.7, leaving that out, does not really affect this. But then, of course, there might be situations where you are an OR for an EU-based company who cannot supply a substance to a Russian or Belarusian owned entity in Turkey. Then that is something that you have to then come to terms with and work accordingly, of course. This is a very complicated topic and a very good question, and probably something that we will touch upon in a separate webinar at some point, or some sort of communication. So I will not go into further details here, except to say that, of course, in Turkey, if we just look at Turkey in isolation, they have no, as far as I know, essentially no sanctions on Russian entities. So, but the sanctions, of course, lie with non-Turkish companies who may send chemicals to Turkey and then could be used by Russian companies. In those cases, of course, it's up to the supply chain and the supplier to then choose not to provide to such clients. But that's really not an issue of the regulation per se. It is completely separate. So we'll not go into details here. Number 16, is there a public list of chemicals registered with lead registrant details? Sibel, please.
Yeah, here, as I said, not registered substances, but only there is a list in KKS, just informing who are the lead companies per substance, which for the available, of course, available lead registrants.
Thank you, Sibel. And then question 17, I can take this, I'll just speed up a bit. How do the announcement recently made regarding CSR important details affect the dossier that have already been submitted? So I would say that the important information inclusion remains optional, so you can still do that. If you submitted already the CSR in Turkish language, good for you, then you don't have to update the dossier. So in effect, it does not have any bearing on the dossier submitted already, because the 1.7 section information on importers is still optional. You can do that if you want. So we would see that as optional information in dossiers that have already been submitted. So no effects that can be identified here. So except positive, because if you already submitted, then good for you, especially the CSR in Turkish language. How long will it take for REACHLaw to prepare a KKDIK registration dossier and submit it from the time we have access to EU REACH data? So I assume in this case the question is pertaining to lead dossiers, and I would say that For the smaller tonnage bands, we are talking about a few weeks, 1 to 4 weeks. Then for the higher tonnage bands, we're talking about like 4 weeks and 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks for the really difficult cases. So we can do this fairly quickly, and if we are in really a hurry, then I suspect we could do it even quicker. But these are the normal timelines, if you will, for when we do these type of dossiers. Data sharing and assignment of lead, I think this we have covered in previous webinars, and will not go into details here, except to say that you can't just assign yourself as a lead. You have to go through a voting procedure and give enough time to the CIF members, pre-CIF members, to voice their opinion. Typically, they don't say anything, but some do, and those need to be accounted for. And if you have a majority, then you become a lead. Then the second to last question: is there any further changes in requirements for foreign manufacturers to comply and complete KKDIK registration? So there's no, I mean, there has not been any changes except for maybe the situation where you don't have to provide the section 1.7 data in an OR dossier. But other than that, maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but other than that, there's no changes per se. And last question, pre-submitted: what is the current percentage of confirmed lead registrants? So this was, we looked at this. So if we had, assuming that we have 7,000 substances to be registered, different substances to be registered for Turkey, and we had 2,771 substances where a lead has been nominated, then that would make it to around just a bit under 40%. So that would be your percentage of confirmed lead registrants, provided, of course, the total number of substances is around 7,000. If it's less, then it's higher percentages. If it's more, then it's a lower percentage. Okay, I think due to we've already gone half an hour over, I'll just take one question from the chat just to at least cover one. I'll just have a quick one which may be representative of the situation, and we've not specifically covered here. Give me just a second. Let's take this one. So question is, in case of a substance is imported by a Turkish company and our Turkish customer, is it possible to have to pay only one letter of access? So yes. So if you have a Turkey company that is importing into Turkey, then this one substance, then of course you, per that company, if that is your only legal entity going to register the substance, then you'd only have to buy, of course, one letter of access. However, if you have many subsidiaries, each of them importing, I don't know why would you do this, but if you would have, then of course each legal entity importing more than 1 ton would have to buy their own letter of access. But in this case, of course, you may start considering maybe consolidating your imports under one entity to save, for example, on the registration costs. I hope that answers the question, if I understood the question correctly. And I think with that, let's see if it's one more quick question. This goes to you, Sibel. So the question is there an accessible source website of the registered substances, the 650 that have been submitted, lead registration dossiers submitted in English? I'm pretty sure to say that not in English, but Sibel, if you want to elaborate this quickly, that'll be our last question. Answer.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Freddy. Here, I would say that this number comes from the authority side. They in our latest meeting, updated that there is 650 lead registration dossiers accepted, and we so far did not have this similar page as ECA. Then we do not see this information yet. But later on, after the registration deadline, they are planning to publish this dissemination page, which is indicating also the registered substances.
Thank you, Sibel. And I can see that many of the questions that have been submitted also have been answered in one way or another. For the few ones that we are not having time to answer here, that as due to the nature of being a bit more complex, we will come back to you directly one-on-one to discuss those further. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and again, apologies for going overboard, over time, so to speak. And thank you very much, Sibel, for co-hosting this webinar. And of course, the biggest thank you goes to all of you who attended and are still attending this webinar. So thank you very much, and thank you for your good questions. And I hope you got what you came for. And please feel free to contact us at any time. We're happy to help. And if you need to become a lead, and there is no lead, just do it, become the lead, and we'll be glad and happy to help you with that. So with that said, thank you very much and stay safe.